Should we wait 30 seconds for people to find their links here, or should we just get started?
I think we're okay to get started whenever you are.
All right, then. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine. I'm the facilitator for today. And with me here is Lauren, who is our Zoom host, and she is our tech wizard for the session. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce our wonderful speakers to you. So welcome to our session. We acknowledge the traditional territory upon which the conference is being hosted. For many thousands of years, the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of the Credit, have sought to walk gently on this land. This territory is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit, as well as by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. This acknowledgement signals our desire to seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based on honor and deep respect, and is a starting point to remind us all to enact this work in our personal and professional lives. I would also invite you to put your locations as well as whose land you're on in the chat if you feel comfortable. So I know we have a lot of people from various places. You can feel free to share in the chat. Now for our presenters, we have three today that are co-presenters from the Community Permaculture Lab. And Brody Robbenmeyer is a permaculture practitioner in Hamilton. Deborah Boyd is enthusiastic about permaculture and is leading new permaculture projects in Dundas, Ontario. Adrian Hodson is a designer, facilitator, and educator with Design Gem Permaculture working in Hamilton. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, hopefully everyone can see this clearly. Well, great. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Permaculture in a Living Community Laboratory, exploring the permaculture ethics and design principles through water. So we just included this slide as a reminder of all of the different peoples and cultures that have been on this land, and just something that we wanted to share in terms of expressing our gratitude to all of these different peoples and cultures who have been and still are on this land, and all of you as well who are trying to deepen and explore your relationship with the land here. We also included this image because we thought it was important sort of framing for each of us. This is essentially a self-portrait for many of you who are with us in the Great Lakes region. This is basically what you look like from 1,000 kilometers that way. That's about somewhere here in the GTA to over here in Duluth or Rimouski in Quebec or Minneapolis at distance. And so this is something that is important, I think, to kind of think about, because there's a very good chance that you're somewhere in this picture, this image. So my name is Brody Robbenmeyer. I was connected with Community Permaculture Lab through my mother, Cynthia Meyer, and I'll be joined with Deborah Boyd and Adrian Hodgson, who have just been introduced as well. So the push of this presentation is going to be exploring the 3 permaculture ethics and 12 design principles through interactions with water. And the focus will be kind of on the household community level. And water was what we chose as our kind of vehicle or teacher and influence for this presentation, just because of each of our kind of affinity and closeness to it. So just to help me out, I'd like to get to know who is all here just a little bit better and to kind of determine how we're speaking about things in this presentation. So if you have a mobile device, if you could just scan that QR code or go to menti.com and enter that code there. I'm going to start just 2 quick questions. And so I'm going to just pop out of that to, there we go. So the first question that I was curious to ask is, how many years have you been alive? I'm going to just wait a few moments for going to okay. All right. So of those that have responded, it seems like I don't know if younger and is the correct term, but 18 to 33 seems like the dominant age group in the audience. Okay. The next question, how familiar are you with permaculture concepts? So on a scale from 1 to 4, 1 being basically none, to 4 being deeply, deeply familiar with permaculture and the concepts. Okay. All right, interesting. So the people who are 3s, and people with practically no familiarity. Interesting distribution of people. All right, well, thank you everyone for humoring me with that. That's helpful to know who all is here. So before we go further, we decided that we wanted to share some context with all of you. We felt it was important just to give you a sense of where our thought process was at and to hopefully add context to the words that we say in this presentation. So the first thing was being mindful of cultural erasure and savior complexes with permaculture. Permaculture is a fantastic framework. I think it's got a lot of great things going for it. But something that we want to be careful about is sort of forgetting about all of the rich cultural history that it draws upon and all the people and things that have been involved in these sorts of practices prior to the existence of permaculture, and that we're not necessarily trying to practice in a way to save the world or just, that we've got the solution for everyone, but more of an exploration of some of these concepts and a co-creation with people. The next thing that we feel is really important is to be open to engaging with paradox and non-dualistic thinking. So I think you're going to see throughout the presentation maybe things that I say that could sound contradictory. An example would maybe be that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to share with all of you my not knowing in hopes that it can contribute to our shared collective consciousness and hopefully help you in some way to achieve your own goals with environmental education or exploration of these ideas and concepts. Another really important grounding for us is recognizing the current mass extinction and the interwoven, unfolding existential crises that we're all facing. And with that, the likely end to many people's current way of life, myself included. This is something I think for us that has been important in that we don't really want to operate from a place of fear, but to operate from a place of respect and recognition for these really massive challenges and things that are facing us. The next context that was very important was this concept of toxic certainty. Just hearing those words hopefully has kind of triggered you to some sort of sense of what it can mean. Toxic certainty can manifest in many different ways. And I was recently introduced to this concept through a mindfulness communication organization called the Green Zone Institute. But part of what makes it so important to kind of be mindful of it is because toxic certainty is certain. And one of the ways that it was explained to me in terms of closed communication was with teacups. So you could have maybe a cracked teacup, which would not hold water. The water would flow through. Or maybe you had an upturned teacup, which the water would just flow around, which wouldn't hold the water. Or maybe you had a full teacup, which couldn't accept any more. And so a little bit of the balance here is, once again, not really operating, not wanting to operate from a place of just self-doubt, but also being willing to question all sorts of things and not slipping into a sort of toxic certainty where we're no longer open to the present moment, to reality as it is, whatever that may be. And another really important bit of context is remembering impermanence and the mystery that is time and space. Here we are together in this weird and wild place, whatever it is. And that's something I think that all of us are engaging with and trying to explore and think about in this practice. So what is permaculture? That's a pretty standard question. I think I'm going to hand it over to Deborah Boyd to share.
Thanks, Brody. I'm really grateful to be here with all of you this morning. It's an interesting question and not a simple answer, but to me, permaculture is a framework of ethics and principles that guide us to integrate ourselves with the patterns of nature. Adrian?
Yeah, it's a huge question, and I want to say so much, but we have to start somewhere. I think permaculture, to me, it's about practical and locally appropriate actions that are centered around a question of what it would take for humankind to live peacefully and perpetually on Earth.
Thank you, too. And following that, yeah, I think maybe permaculture to me is a recognition of relationships and working with those relationships, exploring them in a good way. So next, we just wanted to share a video of two of the founding members of the Permaculture Lab, Adam Caravale and Cynthia Meyer.
What I would like people to understand with permaculture is that it's not the traditional type of food producing system that we're very, very accustomed to in North America and Western culture. It's not all about efficiency and mass production. It's working with nature and understanding that we need to restore nature and that it doesn't need to be 100% anthropocentric views all the time. We need to know that nature needs to get its fair share as well.
I got involved because I knew permaculture to be a system that is self-caring, low tillage, that I could have a garden that would provide a yield, help sustain our family against the food insecurity that is approaching us and exists in the world today, and as a method for teaching other people, an education example for other people in the community to see what can be done, what they can do in their own yards, and help mitigate some of the effects of the climate disruption that we're experiencing right now.
Oh, whoops. So here we have the classic permaculture ethics and design principles. This is courtesy of permacultureprinciples.com. And I think just an important point to make is that there really is no beginning or end to these sorts of things. And part of our practice and exploration is trying to find balance between all of these things, because they really are interdependent and interconnected. So we're just going to try and move through some of these things, and due to practical limitations, we are going to be not necessarily giving each of these the time that it deserves, but we'll do the best that we can with what we have. So we'll start with earth care, and part of that is recognizing that water is fundamental for all ecosystems on our planet, particularly at the site of the home and in the community. We see it as crucial for the transmission of energy, and that energy can take the form of nutrients. So that could be in the form of maybe moving thermal energy around the lake from the lake bed to the surface, or maybe it's a matter of moving nutrients through our own bloodstream or through our own bodies. We see this echoed. The next ethic is people care. And some of you may be familiar, one of the prime directives of permaculture is to take care of ourselves and our children. And recognizing that human beings are comprised of 45 to 75% water by mass, that to me means that if we want to take care of people, we really also need to take care of the water that is flowing through their bodies, around their bodies, and near them, all of these sorts of interconnected systems of water. And the last ethic we had here was fair share. And wasn't sure what image to share, but this one felt important because it really has a lot of information on it. And it can be a helpful visualization for keeping in mind that there is effectively a fixed amount of H2O on this planet. And you can see here what a massive amount is in the oceans, seas, and bays, and how much of it is fresh water. And I'd like to draw your attention to that little red square, which is biological water, all of the water stored within the living creatures on the planet. So with this in mind, how can we be fair in our usage of it or sharing it? Practically for us at the home and community level, this has led to more thoughtful use of water and doing a lot of behavioral changes rather than big renovations at the moment. So maybe that's not flushing after urinating all the time, or maybe it's washing your clothes a bit less, or maybe it's having a wash basin in the shower. So any incidental water is collected into it and you can use that to flush the toilet. Or maybe it's just avoiding doing water intensive activities during a rain event so that we're putting less stress on our combined sewage system. Things like this have been impacted by our idea of fair share. So the first design principle, very important, observing and interacting, huge amount to it. It's very much a continual practice. And we're going to share a little bit from a video of some of the rainwater flows that we had observed and interacted with.
Here we're watching, Brody has gone out to record some of during a rain event so that we can interact with the rainfall and see how we're managing water on site at the Community Permaculture Lab, and different ways that we've been able to distribute water through the yard, as well as you'll see here in a moment, storage vessel for, oh, didn't see it there. Different ways that we're able to store, spread water and sink water on the site and to use it between rainfall events. This principle, observe and interact, is really key to the idea of permaculture because it's really based on direct experiential experience. And so when we take time to observe and interact, that can really inform our choices better, so that we're not applying formulas to what we do, but that we can really make good decisions that are based on direct experience. This was recorded in March. So the ground's still frozen, the rain barrel's not hooked up, but yet there's still a bucket under there to catch the drips. The overflow is directed into a rain garden there. That was a deep pave project. pickaxed out of the driveway there. And there's another little portion. So the neighbors' downspouts are redirected with their permission onto this property. They don't have much of a side yard there, so it made sense to, we observed that there's a lot of rainwater going down there and it was going into the storm sewer. So here we have it going into the garden. That's a rain bar. It's on a slight grade. And I'm going to tip a barrel of water in there. And you can see that during a rainfall event, which doesn't quite look like pouring water out of a barrel, but what happens is the water flows down and hits the rain bar, and that directs it into the garden as opposed to running down the driveway. Get a little more.
Thank you, Adrian. The next principle we have is catch and store energy. And so a big part of that for us on site has meant catching and storing rainwater, because water is a form of energy. And a way that we've also tried to interact with that is to catch and store water at height. So as the water is making its journey towards Earth's gravitational center, there's potential kinetic energy there. And we're trying to harness that to increase our head pressure. Another way that we're interacting with it is trying to use shaded areas so that we're limiting the amount of light energy on the tank to not encourage microbial growth as much as we can. The next principle is to obtain a yield. For us, this has also meant recognizing what potential and actual yields there are. So kind of observing and being thoughtful enough. These often have temporal factors, which are based on water flows. So for example, when do we want to try to put a spigot into a tree to get sap from the maple trees? Or when is the water going to be thawed in a certain part of ground? These sorts of things are what we're considering about yields. And also that the yields can take all kinds of different forms, particularly human relationships. And I think most of us are appreciative of the fact that human relationships are a really important yield, and they can also be a really challenging one because working together with other humans is kind of a lifelong practice. The next principle is to apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So for us, a big part of that has been sizing water storage, looking at how much rainfall we've had, how much we're expected to get, what are the patterns like, what is our usage like? And in the images we've included, looking at some of our composting and seeing what the moisture levels were in there and trying to accept some of that feedback and regulate it there, or measuring soil temperatures and using a cold frame to insulate and also retain some moisture in raised beds. The next principle we have is to use and value renewable resources and services. This is something I think also that we're thinking about in terms of what does it really mean when you're saying a resource. As you've probably heard throughout the conference, that's some of the shift maybe going on in some of our minds too, is really how do we view the natural world and how are we treating it. Anyways, for us, water is a renewable resource on site, but that is dependent also on external factors that we don't control and also how we're using it on the site. And so the images we've included is harvesting from a hops plant. The water that we had watered this plant with that had gone into this, we recognized the value of it and we saw that this could be a potential yield. So we harvested it and brewed our first and very own CPL beer. The next principle we have here is to produce no waste. And so that can be changing the flows of water on the land so that nutrients aren't being washed away and potentially polluting another habitat. Here we have images of some engagement with the landscape to try to retain some of that water and change its flow patterns with these sort of step platforms here that you see. Also, we've included an image of a raised bed, which recognizing once again that water went into this resource, so that when we were doing changes to the design on one of the sites, this was available and we were able to find another household who could use this raised bed for their own needs and to help further their designs. So that was really part of that idea of just waste doesn't really exist. It's more within our minds. So design from patterns to details. What are the weather patterns and the climate like the site? And so we've included some images courtesy of Design Jam, of some site analyses. And we're thinking about also how do the details affect the larger patterns on site, that kind of interrelatedness. So for example, what would be some of the dominant winds? Where is that carrying moisture on the site? Or what is the typical rainflow pattern like, to a detail like maybe what is the soil composition like? So what is the drainage rate going to be? Or how are people moving through a site, and where would they want to have access to water at? These sorts of things. The next principle we have is to integrate rather than segregate. And so a big part for our designs have been trying to integrate water collection, retention, and infiltration throughout the design. And a big part, and I know this is terribly simple, but also terribly rich and deep, is working with what is already there, starting where you're at. And that can mean on so many different levels. Some of the examples that we've shown in picture form here is a sheet mulching of the yard. So rather than turning up all the topsoil and microbiology that had developed there, we sheet mulched over it and tried to incorporate some of those structures into a new layer of topsoil that it was integrated into. We also have images of a rain garden being created. So wanting to plant more and kind of depave things, we thought, why not combine that with more rainwater storage as much as we could on site. And also these raised beds themselves, we integrated from a windmill project to try to avoid that waste. We ended up reusing these windmill crates for raised beds. The next principle was to use small and slow solutions. This is this can take the form of planting drought-resistant flora wherever possible in our design. Trying to avoid plants that are going to be really water intensive in an unintentional way, at least, and also having an iterative design process. So the images we've included is centered around the construction of this ferroconcrete bench. And this was a process in terms of thinking about what we wanted, how we wanted to have seating. We wanted to have some sort of social space, and what sort of materials could we use. And as you can see here in the top, there's my initial kind of mock-up of a digital model for the bench. And then as we were building it, we thought maybe we could include having water and a pond into the bench structure itself and a raised bed into that. And here in the corner, you see some storage for firewood and a little dry spot, and the water to kind of play off of the fire that would be in the front. So these are some of the things that we were able to do through a sort of slow and small solution-oriented design process. Using and valuing diversity. Hugely important, diversity of opinions and contributions in design planning, and diversity of life, plants, animals, minerals, all of that good stuff here. We've included some pictures of just some of the people that have been involved in some of the ideation that we were doing initially, like all of these design ideas. This room was just littered in papers and the diversity that was there. We also partnered with McMaster University, and these students from different parts of the world, like Finland and Australia and Nigeria, and we're drawing upon some of their knowledge to help us in the way this project was developing, that kind of idea of co-creation. Creatively using and responding to change, hugely important. Changes in plan have been adapted to changing participation. And applying what we have learned at one site in ways that support designs at other sites with their own unique context and needs. So not necessarily trying to find solutions for all, like a panacea, but trying to, bring these learnings with us and build upon them. And that changing participation could mean different people coming in and taking part, or pulling away and doing other things. Or maybe it was certain things that we would consider a pest or a disease or a fungus or a weed that we hadn't considered in the design, and how we responded to that or how we worked with it. Using the edges and valuing the marginal. So the edges have been helpful for us in terms of defining scope. They can be really helpful in terms of, looking at the edges of the property, for instance, of a residential lot. Where is the water flowing onto the property? Where is it flowing off of it? In what ways are the edges kind of retaining or open up to things? So some of the images we've included is from a workshop that we held that was looking at home insulation and energy around the edges of the home, and these marginal sort of little spaces around electrical outlets where energy or heat could move through, and that these sorts of things had a really big impact. We also have another image of this rain garden, which had stones that were harvested from a local church. And this was how we were able to help define this edge more. And we were able to kind of have a new purpose for these things. Also, the valuing the marginal could be something simple like these 4-leaf clovers in the top right, or the dandelions that aren't really weeds, but are living creatures that can help support other life, other living creatures. They also tied in the neighbor's downspouts. That's a big helpful thing too. So that's pretty much it. We wanted to try and move through those fairly quickly to just leave space for questions or comments. And we would invite you to just, please ask us whatever you want. Deborah and Adrian are both wealths of knowledge, and I'm going to leave it on this splash page because we are also inviting any of you who are interested, please get in contact with us. We've included an email in the corner, but I would definitely recommend using this link and this form to reach us, just because it has a nicer format and it can help us get to know one another better more quickly. So that's it. Did anyone else want to speak? Because I think now is when I would invite everyone to just turn on your webcams and unmute yourselves as you see fit.
Hi all.
Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry if it was a little quiet. I was, apologies. Hopefully it wasn't too bad.
I'm just so curious of if the eyes were an intentional choice, an artistic choice.
Oh, artistic. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah. Were there any questions that any of you had maybe about your own projects or things that you were doing? I know that we were really curious how, for each of you, your own practice with permaculture, your exploration into it, how water has impacted you or things that you are looking at doing in the near-term future. Because I mean, I'm recognizing we're a group of really passionate people, I think, and I'm sure that each of you has some expertise to share.
Brody, I'm sorry, I'm just popping in late to your presentation, so I apologize. I've been intrigued by permaculture for quite a while, and interestingly, even though I do run a couple of small gardens, I've been certainly trying to implement the principles of permaculture in my garden spaces, but I've also been using the principles of permaculture as a metaphorical in a metaphorical way in my writing, which has been working really well. So it's interesting how the principles really provide guidance on how to move forward with one's professional activities and one's life, in addition to some very practical advice in terms of gardening. So I apologize if you've already mentioned, because I joined late.
Thank you, Hillary. Yeah, I feel you on that. Totally. Oh, I remember when I met Adrian, he had kind of referred to So the community permaculture lab was almost like a Trojan horse. Like it was a gardening group or under the guise of a gardening group, but it was so much more than that. As you were saying, Hillary, like permaculture has just these kind of far-reaching implications. If you're open to and willing to kind of explore those possibilities, I mean, my goodness. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, I think the principles really they're a framework, right? And so you can use them as a metaphor for sure. That it's, you know, the garden is a metaphor. So whatever you're doing, people have used the permaculture principles to design programming for video games, for organizing communities, groups, for developing a business plan, all kinds of things. And really, what the principles are is that they're a mnemonic. They're a way to remember how healthy functioning ecosystems work. And everything is an ecosystem, right? You know, we can have an ecosystem of ideas. We can have an ecosystem of politics. We can have an ecosystem in our back garden. We can have an ecosystem on the farm. So they're really a handy framework to use. And they're just, I think the intention with permaculture was always that its strength was that the principles have a universality to them, but the idea was that they would be strongest when they're locally interpreted and locally used. So what I do in Hamilton, Ontario is different than what someone does in Burlington, Ontario, because the framework it has enough integrity, but it's loose enough that it can be open to interpretation, so that we're not applying formulas to what we do, because that's a very mechanistic way of living, right? Whereas if we use these principles as a reminder of how healthy functioning ecosystems work, where it speaks of diversity, but it's not, it's reminding us that healthy functioning ecosystems that come through a healthy process are diverse. And it's not an aesthetic that you put on at the end. It's a reminder that is a function of a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually reminded of Julian's talk this morning, if you came to hear the keynote, because, you know, he talks so much about the importance of having diverse perspectives and worldviews incorporated in our urban environments. And I think that's just another reminder from permaculture that you're absolutely right, that diversity is important, not just from a biological standpoint, from a social cultural standpoint as well.
Yeah.
It's truly a design for living. I'm just going to post a list of resources. One of the opportunities that we've had that's come up during the pandemic is our ability to connect perhaps more frequently online. And we've hosted a number of workshops over the last few months, and each one is connected to permaculture and explains a little bit more about it. So I'll post it in the chat in case you decide to save the chat after. You can check out some of the things we put together.
Harveen, I see that your hand is up. Hopefully I pronounced your name properly, please.
Yes, you did, Brody, thanks. I had a question, I guess now that I have this opportunity to speak to experts in permaculture, what would you say are some of the fundamental differences between permaculture and what we've come to know today as regenerative agriculture? Or is there like a lot? I mean, I'm assuming there's a lot of overlap, but what are the kind of the things that permaculture takes into account that regenerative agriculture maybe falls a bit short on?
I can speak to that a bit. I mean, regenerative agriculture is really predicated on a degenerative agriculture. So it couldn't really exist without the type of conventional agriculture we have. The regenerative agriculture, the modern regenerative agriculture movement, because, you know, traditional land care was always regenerative, but we've lost our way a lot, especially in Western culture. We've lost our way, and when we do, even just looking mathematically, it's all the lines are going down, saying, you know, we can't sustain this. So regenerative agriculture is a reaction to that. And regenerative agriculture, permaculture is about 50 years old now as an idea, and it's a modern permaculture is a modern idea because it's a modern idea in that it's a response to the Anthropocene, right? So permaculture has co-evolved with this idea of a regenerative agriculture. Really, it's part of the permaculture vision. But regenerative agriculture has grown up a lot from starting as an idea, maybe in the minds of some as it's a little bit better than sustainable. Like if sustainable is like this, regenerative agriculture is a little bit better. But when you follow the logic, nothing's sustainable unless it's regenerating, right? And so part of the influence that permaculture has had to co-evolve this idea of regenerative agriculture is that nothing exists in isolation. All living systems are nested within one another, and not like a nesting doll. It's not so neat. It's actually hard to gesture. But living systems are all nested. You know, we have cells in our bodies and organs in our bodies, and we have our bodies, and it's all on a continuum too, right? But certainly my body is in a community that's in a watershed, in a life shed, in a bioregion. And the idea with regenerative agriculture is that you can't just have a field that's better than sustainable, like it's actually getting better every year in isolation. It has to be in a community that's getting better with people that are getting better together, right? So so permaculture is really it's a great framework, as we've been saying. It's a helpful framework for folks like me who grew up in the suburbs, who've lost my connection to this land, right? And to this understanding that was so inherent before, that's still there. But, you know, yeah, again, from my own experience, being a suburbanite, having grown up in the suburbs, it was really useful for me. It's not always needed by others who maybe understand this automatically, but yeah.
Adrian, if I could jump in there too, one of the things that it makes me think of too is just in terms of recognizing some of the strengths of that. And with regards to your question, Harveen, I see permaculture as just kind of having a slightly broader scope or maybe application because of some of those design ideas. And also something that I've been thinking about too is just not getting so caught up in sometimes in the form, recognizing the importance of form, but not getting caught up in the form, that you kind of, with the toxic certainty, that you're so certain of the form or the solution or whatever, you know, your goal is, that you can kind of miss what's there. And I'm sure, you know, I would expect that each of us does it in ways. And there was a speaker, Dan Longboat, he's from the Mohawk Nation, I think he's Turtle Clan. He was talking about this teaching that had been shared with him of like being in this time of like coming together and like almost like each of us being like trees and the roots of our trees interconnected, like these mycelial networks, that in this time ahead of us, I think that all of us recognize that there's some really big challenges ahead. And how do we navigate that in a way that's caring, compassionate, and like present in the moment? How can we do that so that we're thinking about the future, we're recognizing the past as well, but we're not so caught up in those things that we lose sight of the present moment? Oh boy, that's a challenge. I also see that we have a time check, so in a few minutes we are going to need to close, but I guess I would invite anyone else to, is there any last kind of comments or questions that anyone else would like to make? I see NBEN Renby.
That's the acronym of my organization, New Brunswick Environmental Network, or Réseau Environnemental Nouveau-Brunswick, and I can't change it to actually reflect who I am. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
My name's Somi, and I coordinate the Sustainability Education Alliance out here. So I work in Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Passamaquoddy territory of the Wabanaki Confederacy. And I just wanted to put it out there that I'm the coordinator of a network of educators out here. So if there's anybody in the Maritimes who wants to be in touch with other teachers doing this kind of thing, please let me know. I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Love it. Yeah. Coming together.
And if you know of anybody else doing a similar network thing wherever you are, let me know and I can still be the connector person to those people.
Yeah, and that's definitely why we encourage anyone to reach out if you're willing to, is just so that if we aren't able to directly participate, that we can try and facilitate those connections and hopefully support each other in some ways that we might not be able to imagine at the current moment.
I have a quick question. I know we're running low on time, but this has been really great. I was a little bit late too, so I'm sorry if you elaborated on this already, but part of the title of this session, the Community Living Laboratory, really intrigued me. And from what you described about a lot of what you were doing, sounds like it was based on observation and experimentation. But this concept of a community laboratory is really intriguing to me. And I was just wondering if if you could elaborate a little bit more on like a community laboratory model within the context of permaculture, and if that's scalable, if that's something that could be replicated, and I guess what sorts of components would be valuable for that type of model.
Yeah, I have just some quick thoughts on that. Would be that is something I think that we're still trying to evolve and focus on. When we were trying to come up with the sort of framing of this group, we like the idea of a laboratory as well, in the broad sense of a place of experimentation and exploration, and that, you know, failure was encouraged, or it wasn't really, it's not like it was some kind of hard and fast sort of thing. Through our partnership with McMaster, we've had some more of that. We've also done some kind of sampling and looking at some more of the kind of quantitative side of the sort of laboratory experience. That's something I think that we're going to be trying to develop more. And in terms of making that sustainable, so far for us, I feel like it has meant just trying to create that sort of space of like open curiosity and questioning, you know, really not being so motivated by the answer, but recognizing the importance of the questions. I don't know, hopefully that wasn't too like abstract and broad.
No, that was great, thank you.
I was going to say, one of the other, there are more permaculture principles we could tell you about. One of them is the problem is the solution. And because we're a place of learning and co-teaching, co-learning from one another, that we can do no wrong, because every time we try something and it doesn't work, we can learn from it, right? And every time we want to do something we don't know how, we can learn from each other about how to do it. And so, and we can, you know, so it's amazing that, you know, this place can be a laboratory, like Brody said, more of a place of curiosity and tinkering and experimenting and really trying things out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a value or an ethic that we didn't really mention specifically, but I think important is just the intrinsic value of life. You know, it's not necessarily that we're not always able to just be like, yeah, this is why it's valuable, but just sometimes just recognizing like that awe, that wonder of just like, oh my gosh, this reality is wild, it's crazy, and how beautiful it can be, you know, like not to, that we don't confuse the finger pointing at the moon for the moon, or like the name moon for the moon, you know, it's something different itself. Yeah, I don't know, I'm sort of, words are not serving me too well, but I'm trying anyways.
If I could just,
oh, sorry, Deborah.
If I could just add to your question, Julie, about expanding the project. So the scope of the project was really at the property that you saw photos of today, where Brody lives, and the Community Permaculture Lab has recently looked at implementing design teams at 2 other properties as well. And so it's not a direct pollination, it's like planting a hybrid seed from the parent. It doesn't look exactly the same as the initial mothership project, but nonetheless, we are still in the practice and looking for other applications. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's just something that I find really intriguing, and I think would be so valuable for communities to have a space to experiment and learn. So it's really awesome to see the work that you're doing, and I hope that, yeah, it continues to expand, and I would love to see where it goes and see if something like that could be implemented in the community that I live in. So
yeah, feel free to zoom into our design team meetings. They're posted on the Community Permaculture Lab Facebook page. There's a Google Calendar, and they're all posted there, and you can join us and see how we actually function as a group and what it looks like.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Harveen, did you want to make a last comment? And then I guess I'll hand it off to Lauren after that.
Oh, no, I'm good. I think my hand is still up from last time. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, Lauren, shall I hand it over to you? Thank you also to Ecom and all the folks, all the work that you've put in to just And all of you for all the stuff you're doing. I'm sure that all of you are involved in your own ways. So big thank you to all of you too.
Much, Brody, Adrienne, and Deborah, for sharing your experiences and your stories, as well as all the things that we need to think about, especially with what we know and the toxic, what was that term again? Toxic certainty.
Toxic
Yeah.
certainty.
That is a new word for me. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Happy to. Yeah, I had the same impact on me too. It's just like, oh,
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
All right.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your presentations you're attending today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.